Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My dear students, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Dr. Muhammad Shafiq, and I am a lecturer at the Department of Islamic and Pakistan Studies. The course I'm teaching is called Introduction to Logic. Course code is PHI 101, and this is lecture number 18. Today we are going to discuss what is categorical syllogism and what are the rules of categorical syllogism. So let's have a look. The outline or this lecture basically consists upon the definition of what is categorical syllogism and also what are the basic rules of categorical syllogism. We are concentrating on this categorical syllogism only because most of the time syllogistic arguments are categorical in categorical shape. Very occasionally there are hypothetical syllogistic arguments or disjunctive. Now, in previous lecture we discussed what is categorical syllogism briefly, and just to recap, I want to tell you again that syllogism is a deductive argument which consists upon only two parts where there are two premises and one conclusion. And the categorical syllogism is that syllogistic argument which contains categorical propositions. Now, what are the rules of these categorical syllogisms? We'll discussing these now. Let's move on. What is syllogism, as I discussed in previous lecture in detail, but we'll discuss it briefly again. I'll just read the definition of you. A syllogism is a three-part logical argument based on deductive reasoning in which two premises are combined to arrive at a conclusion. So long as the premises of the syllogism are true and the syllogism is correctly structured, the conclusion will be true. Rather, it will be 100% true, as discussed in the kinds of arguments. Deductive arguments are those arguments which the premises support conclusion conclusively, and that basically means if the premises are true, conclusion will be 100% true. So, syllogistic argument being a deductive argument is the one of which conclusion is 100% true if the premises are true. An example of syllogism is, as I also discussed in previous lecture, that is, all mammals are animals, that's the first premise. All elephants are mammals, that's the second premise. And therefore, all elephants are animals. In a syllogism, the more general premise is called major premise, that is, all mammals are animals. The more specific premise is called the minor premise. In this case, that all elephants are mammals. The conclusion joins the logic of two premises, or we basically draw conclusions on the basis of two premises, or linking the two premises, and the conclusion contains different terms which indicate a conclusion, such as therefore, hence, that is why, conclusively, to conclude, etc. So this is the definition of syllogism. Similarly, as we discussed in previous lecture about categorical syllogism briefly, categorical syllogism is that syllogistic argument contains three propositions, obviously, it's a syllogistic argument must have three propositions. But uh, being a categorical syllogism, it must have categorical propositions as its premises. Either both of the premises must be categorical propositions. We cannot use hypothetical or disjunctive proposition in categorical syllogism, otherwise it will lose its meaning. So, a categorical syllogism is an argument consisting of exactly three categorical propositions, two premises and a conclusion, in which there appear approximately three categorical terms, each of which is used to exactly twice. So if you look into the other premise, which links the middle and minor terms, we call the minor premise. So there are three terms used in this argument, in this categorical syllogistic argument. The first term is used primates, which is used in both premises. It's the subject of the first premise, which is the major premise, and the predicate of the minor premise. So this term, which links the both premises, is also called minor term. The predicate of the first premise, which is mammals, is called major term. It is again used twice in the first premise and in the conclusion. If you look into the subject of the second premise, which is human being, that is again used twice, first in the second premise and second in the conclusion. So there are exactly three terms in this categorical syllogistic argument: the major term, minor term, and the middle term. So primates, mammals, and human beings, these are the three terms which are used in this argument. Now, let us see what are the basic rules of categorical syllogism. As we have discussed in previous lecture with a brief definition of syllogism, what is syllogism, but we need to look in detail what are the basic rules of categorical syllogism. So the first rule, the first principle of categorical syllogism is that a syllogism must contain three propositions, right? As I said earlier and defined it in previous lecture as well as this lecture, that syllogism, the basic requirement of syllogistic argument is must have not more, not less, but only three propositions. So, a syllogism must contain three and only three propositions, neither more nor less. Syllogism is always composed of three propositions, namely the major premise, in which major and middle terms are compared, minor premise, in which minor and middle terms are compared, and the conclusion in which the minor and major terms are related together. So the first principle or first rule of categorical syllogism is it must contain three propositions: major premise, minor premise, and conclusion. The second rule of categorical syllogism is that it must contain exactly three terms. A syllogism must contain three and only three terms, neither more nor less. A syllogism is the comparison of two terms, major and minor, by means of third term that is called middle term. From this rule, it follows that no term should be ambiguous. Terms must be clear. Why? Because if it is ambiguous, it equals to two terms, and then syllogism will have four terms and will not remain syllogism anymore. Now, what is ambiguous? Does it ring the bell? If you remember when we were discussing fallacies, there is a fallacy of using ambiguous terms. Fallacies of ambiguity. When in an argument you use a term which carries more than one meaning, that is called an ambiguous term. So, in a syllogistic argument, in a categorical syllogism, we must use clear terms, not ambiguous terms. Because if it is ambiguous, it refers to more than one term. And then in syllogism, there will be more than three terms. Hence, the argument will fail to be called a syllogistic argument. If it has less than three terms, then it is a matter of immediate inference and not syllogism. So, if an argument has more than three terms or less than three terms, that cannot be called syllogistic argument. So that's the second rule. The third rule of categorical syllogism is that the middle term must be distributed. Now, what does it mean? The middle term must be distributed at least once in the premise. By this we mean that the whole of middle term must be referred to in one premise at least. It serves as a link between the two extremes, the major term and the minor term. If the middle term with which the other two terms are compared is undistributed, it means that part of it is compared with the major term and part of it compared with the minor term. Hence, it fails to serve as a link between the two terms, and we cannot draw a conclusion. Does it make any sense? Well, the middle term, in simple words, must work as a link between the major term and minor term, or the major premise and minor premise. For example, all Punjabis are men and all Bengalis are men. The middle term men is undistributed in both, so we cannot draw a conclusion. Because if the first premise says all Punjabis are men, and the second premise says all Bengalis are men, so we cannot deduce a conclusion, we cannot draw a conclusion from this. Hence, it fails to be called categorical syllogism. So this is the third rule for the categorical syllogism. The next rule, rule number 4, says that in a categorical syllogism, if a term is not distributed in premise, it must not be distributed in conclusion. And what does it mean? No term must be distributed in the conclusion if it is not distributed in premise, which contains it. If a major term is undistributed in major premise, it cannot be distributed in conclusion. Similarly, if a minor term is undistributed in minor premise, it cannot be distributed in conclusion. We have read that in syllogism, conclusion is less general than premises, which means no term can have greater extension in the conclusion than its premise. So if a term is distributed in a premise, must be distributed in conclusion. If it is undistributed in a premise, simply must be undistributed in conclusion. The next rule or principle of categorical syllogism is that two negative premises yield no conclusion. If both the premises are negative, we cannot draw a conclusion from these two. How? From two negative premises, there can be no conclusion. A negative proposition shows that there is no conclusion, sorry, there is no connection between its terms. Now, if both the premises are negative, it means the middle terms do not have any connection with major and minor. And therefore, we cannot draw any conclusion from it. The relation of major and minor terms is established through middle terms. If both premises are negative, the middle term will have no connection with both major and minor. Therefore, in order that a syllogism may be valid, one of its premises at least must be affirmative. For example, we cannot say that no Pakistanis are intelligent, no, and in second premise, no students are Pakistani. So both of these premises are negative. We cannot deduce conclusion, we cannot draw conclusion from it. So it is invalid syllogism. So in order to be valid for a categorical syllogism, must have at least one premise affirmative. It cannot have both of the premises negative. Now, the next rule, or rule number 6 of categorical syllogism, says that if one premise is negative, conclusion must be negative. As I said earlier, that categorical syllogism, a valid categorical syllogism, cannot have two propositions, two negative propositions, two negative premises. So it must have at least one affirmative premise. But if one of the premises is negative, that entails that the conclusion must be negative. We cannot have an affirmative conclusion if one of the premises is negative. If one premise is negative, the conclusion must be negative. And if the conclusion is negative, one premise must be negative. If one premise is negative and the other one is affirmative, it means that the middle term agrees with one extreme and disagrees with the other extreme. So extremes will obviously disagree with each other in the conclusion, which follows that conclusion will be negative for sure. It cannot be affirmative conclusion. For example, men are not perfect. That's the first premise, which is negative. The second premise says lawyers are men. So the only valid conclusion from these two premises, or the combination of these two premises, the only valid conclusion we can deduce is, therefore, lawyers are not perfect. If we say, therefore, lawyers are perfect, then obviously it is invalid argument, because premise is saying that men are not perfect, and the second premise admits that lawyers are men. So obviously, lawyers cannot be perfect. If you go back to the laws of thought And if you try to remember this law called law of non-contradiction, in an argument, in order to be valid, there must be no contradiction in it. So when you say men are not perfect, and then in second premise you say lawyers are men, when you draw conclusion saying that lawyers are perfect, you are basically contradicting your premise. So obviously this argument becomes invalid. So this is very important rule to remember, that if one of the premises is negative, conclusion must be negative. So rule number 7 says that two particular premises yield no conclusion. Again, I would ask you to go back in your memory, try to remember what is a particular proposition and what is a general proposition. Or what is a particular premise and what is a general premise. A general premise or a general proposition talks about the whole class, while the particular premise or particular proposition talks about some members of the class. Hence it's called particular proposition. So if both of the premises are particular, for example, if I say Ali is intelligent, that's a particular premise. And then I say Ahmad is intelligent, that's again a particular premise. What kind of conclusion you would draw from these two premises? You cannot draw any conclusion from it. So from two particular premises there can be no conclusion. Two particular premises cannot yield any conclusion. So in every valid syllogism, one premise must be universal. If one premise should say or talk about the whole class, then we'll be able to draw a conclusion from this syllogism. The next rule says one premise is particular, conclusion must be particular. It's exactly the same rule which says that if one premise is negative, the conclusion must be negative. Why it is so? If one premise is particular, the conclusion must be particular, but the universal conclusion can be drawn only and only from two universal premises. And if one premise is particular, the conclusion must be particular. For example, if you say all students are intelligent, that is a universal proposition. And then you say Ahmed is a student, that is a particular proposition. Second thing, the only conclusion or valid conclusion we can draw from these two premises is called, therefore, Ahmed is intelligent. You cannot say, therefore, all human beings are intelligent or whatsoever. So if one of the premises is particular, so the conclusion must also be particular. The next rule, which is the last one, that says that particular major premise and negative minor premise yield no conclusion. That is very tricky. In order to understand this rule, you must be able to identify what is a major premise and what is a minor premise. So if a major premise, this is particular in an argument, you cannot draw a conclusion. How? If you remember, I told you that most German premise is called the major premise. So if it is a particular premise, then how it could be major premise? And negative minor premise similarly cannot use any conclusion. From a particular major premise and a negative minor premise, there can be no conclusion. No conclusion can be followed from a combination of a particular major premise and negative minor premise. So, for valid deductive categorical syllogism, you must follow all these rules. Any of these rules is violated, that basically means your syllogism is no more valid. So this was the categorical syllogism and its basic rules. Again, these are the two books which you can refer to for further explanation, and you can find these books easily available online and also in the library. Of course, there are so many copies lying there. Even after consulting both and listening to the lecture, if you have any confusion or if you do not understand anything or if you have any comments, please do get in touch and let us know so that we can discuss it before next lecture. Till then, thank you very much. Take care. Allah Hafiz.